This week on World Traveler Cooking, we're going to do another American classic. We're going to do a rhubarb pie. Now, the ingredients of this are fairly simple. Rhubarb pie has been in use for quite a while. It's kind of a mainstay of American dessert traditions. And it's wonderful. It's tangy, it's sweet, and actually it's quite simple to make if you can get rhubarb. So we have some ingredients here. I'm going to go over them quickly because there's really not a lot to this. We have a little over 4 cups of rhubarb that I've cut into pieces about like yay. That comes out to be about a pound if you want to measure by weight. I have 200 grams. That's going to be about a cup of sugar. In this case, I'm using turbinado sugar, but you can use a white sugar. That's not a problem. And that's going to be our filling. I will probably sprinkle just a little flour on top, just in case a lot of liquid comes out of this. But you also probably don't have to do that. So maybe I won't. I haven't decided yet. Now the ingredients in the crust are also fairly simple. I have 175 grams of butter, and I'll give you measurements in tablespoons also, and 400 grams of flour, to which I've added half a teaspoon of salt. Now today I'm using a spelt flour because wheat flour has been a bit hard to get a hold of. So I'm just going to go ahead and use a low gluten spelt flour, an all-purpose spelt flour, but an all-purpose wheat flour might be preferable. I also have a little bit of water in the freezer. I like to start with water that's just freezing so that I know it is at exactly freezing point. And then I have possibly another tablespoon or 2 of flour. But again, you know, this would work. Barley flour would probably work. You could probably even do a crust out of rice flour if you needed to. At any rate, let's go ahead and get started. Start with me. So we are going to start by taking our flour and pouring it in here, and then chipping our butter into pieces with a knife. So I'm just going to unwrap the butter. Now set the butter wrapper aside. And I'm just going to take each one of these and I'm going to cut it into pieces. About like yay. Now in the US there's a special little tool in the kitchen for this. But we don't have those here in Germany, so I use a knife. And normally what we do is we cut the butter into the dough. I know some people say always use vegetable shortening, but vegetable shortening is pretty bad for you. Well, butter isn't. So I say just use the butter. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my hands here. I would prefer to have one of these dough tools. And I'm basically going to work this cold butter into this flour until I have something the consistency of beach sand. In other words, when I'm going to push it together, I'll get something like a soft ball that will break apart when I basically that sort of thing. You can think of picking up a ball of wet sand on the beach and how loosely it holds together. So I'm going to be back in a few minutes when I have this all worked in, and we'll go from there. What you can see here now is that I have this dough that almost sticks together. This is a little bit more sticky than I'm used to, so that might be the difference of the spelt flour. I'm going to add just a little more spelt flour to dry it out a little bit. Alright, I think this will work. You see how nice and crumbly this dough is. So if I want a really flaky crust, at this point what I would do is I would put this in the freezer, or I'd put it in the refrigerator to chill for maybe an hour. But I'm not that interested in how flaky it is. I just want it to be like nice and not too crispy or not too chewy and to taste good. So we're going to start adding the ice water. As you can see, the ice water has already frozen over just a little bit. So I'm just going to poke a hole in the top and dribble a little bit in. And then we'll work this just a little bit in at a time until I get something that does stick together. And I suspect with this spelt flour, it's actually not going to take as much water as it would for like a wheat crust. In fact, that might even be enough right there. Not very pliable yet. So it needs a little more water. I expect that to be enough, but who knows? Once you've made a few pie crusts, you'll end up doing most of this part by feel. Yeah, this is feeling much better. Maybe even a little more water than that. Now, the less water you put in, the more crumbly it will be. The more water you put in, the tougher it will be. So you want to balance those two. Alright, I think this is good. So I'm going to knead it on the counter a little bit. Not a whole lot, because I'm not like trying to form gluten, but I am trying to make sure that the water is well distributed. And here we go. So I'm going to wrap this or cover it and put it in the refrigerator. And actually, I don't really have anything else to do, so I guess I'll just probably roll this out right now. And from there, we'll go ahead and fill our pie. Now, in rolling this out, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this into a slightly larger half and a slightly smaller half. I'm going to take the larger half first, because that's going to be the bottom. And I'm going to put it into a ball. And then I'm going to begin to roll it out. And I'm doing this on a piece of baking paper or waxed paper. And I'm just going to do this until I have a piece that's big enough to go on. And See, I probably could have used a little more water on here, but I think this will be fine. Once I get this all rolled out, I'll be back and you can see me flip it in. And from there, we'll start rolling out the top. So now I have a piece of crust that's bigger, significantly bigger than my dish. And so I'm going to grease this pan by just taking the butter here and wiping it very nicely around this whole thing. Puts a very, very thin layer of butter so that this doesn't stick. And then we are going to put this over the pan. So, you'll notice it tore a little there. I'll show you how to deal with that. And I'm going to go ahead and try to lightly, gently pull the paper off. So we see it tore a little bit here. That's okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to just take maybe just a little bit here, and we can actually patch it with our fingers. Like that. Especially if it's in this area where you're just simply not going to see it. Like this. You just patch it. Make sure that the rest of it's nicely set against the bottom so we don't poke more holes. And then just like a little bit here, patch it. This way, like, the juices don't go through while we're baking. I mean, you can technically even just kind of patch it there in place. We have another area there where maybe a little bit could go. And now we have our pie crust again. Any area where there's just a little bit of cracking, just kind of push it, because it will cook together. And anywhere there's a hole, an actual hole, you can take a little bit of dough and patch it over the hole. Alright, then we're going to do the same. Well, actually, then let's go ahead. The next thing we're going to do is fill our pie, so that means taking the rhubarb and spreading it throughout the pie, and then taking our sugar. Now, if you're using fresh rhubarb, you probably don't need to add flour, so I'm not going to add flour here. If you're going to use frozen rhubarb, which sometimes I do, then you'll want to add to this like another tablespoon or so of flour. Now I'm going to roll out the top of the crust, and then we'll pinch it all together. I'll be back once we have that rolled out. Alright, so now we're going to take what we have here, and we're just going to lay it on top. Gently separate. And now we're going to pinch closed. So what we're going to do, this spelt dough is much, much harder to work with than wheat dough. Probably owing to the lower amount of gluten. Spelt and wheat are the only two grains that produce a real solid gluten as bakers understand it. Rye produces something kind of similar, so does barley, but they don't have the same physical properties. And so doing this with spelt here, we'll see how it comes out. My suspicion is that it might be nice and really flaky and probably really crumbly, but it's probably not going to be, but it's really, really hard to work with. So, as a word of warning, I'm doing it this way because I'm having trouble finding wheat flour in the stores. And spelt's probably the closest to wheat in this regard. But you can see even here while I'm pinching it, it's not behaving like a wheat pie crust does. It's tearing on the top. I'm just going to let that go because why not? So this pie crust is a lot more brittle. On the nice side of this, if I wanted to, I guess I could do away with steam vents, but I'm going to do steam vents anyway. So we cut some steam vents in. And next I'll put an egg wash on, and then we'll put it in the oven. So now I'm just brushing it with an egg wash. This is not going to be the prettiest pie in the world because the spelt crust is really hard to work with, but it should be delicious, and the egg wash will make sure that it comes out nice and golden brown. So I'm going to brush all of the exposed crust, and then this can go in the oven. You can see how easily this just kind of fractures. This also kind of gives you an idea of some of the challenges of baking without wheat. Doughs just don't have the same consistency. They have different consistencies with different grains. Stuff like that. So, this is ready to go in the oven. We'll bring it out in about 45 minutes. We're baking it at 180 Celsius or 375 Fahrenheit. And so now we've taken this out of the oven. We're going to let it cool. You can see a little bit of liquid pooling on the top. That's a bad sign. That means I probably should have added some flour anyway. We're going to be back in maybe 15 minutes once this has had time enough to cool enough that I can try to take a small piece out for tasting. Alright, so for the magic moment here, I'm going to just cut a small sliver. You'll see how crumbly this crust is. Again, because of the spelt. And I'm going to use the knife to just kind of pry it up. Yeah, it's pretty liquid inside. This goes to show, when in doubt, add a couple of tablespoons of flour to the to the mixture here. Oh well. It's not the end of the world. You can just kind of spoon some of the sauce over the top. And now I'm going to, this might not look very great, but I'm going to go ahead and do the taste test. So, as I say, first piece often crumbles, that's fine. You can't really get a spatula under it. So I'm going to go ahead and just taste this, and we'll go from there. Again, the fact that this is just a little bit watery means we should have added a little bit of flour. Despite the wateriness, the flavor is really good. The rhubarb comes out loud and clear. Not too sweet, not too sour. And, you know, this is still a delicious dessert. Now, if you find this content helpful, I hope I've earned a subscription from you, and please click the bell so that you can be notified of any future videos that I make. In addition, feel free to like or share my videos, because I do use both of those as indicators in what you guys like, so I can produce more content that you like, so you can participate in that process. Finally, I'd like to invite anybody to comment on the video, not just in terms of, pleasant comments, but also things like, critiques, things you think could be done better, tricks that you have for any of these dishes, because, chances are, if you're watching it, somebody else might watch it, and might read the comments and also get some feedback or some additional ideas from user comments. So I actually really appreciate those comments. I've had comments of people saying, oh, you didn't chop things small enough in this dish or the other, or things like that. Those are all great, and they help other people who are viewing the video to be successful in what they make as well. So I don't have a weak ego. You can certainly provide constructive critique, and I very much enjoy that. At any rate, the recipe, as always, is in the description. Bon appetit, and see you next week.